Okay, we're live on YouTube.
Hello, my name is Joshua Flick, and I'm one of our consultants here at Forelli. Today, we're going to be discussing the what, why, and how for setting up email server-side sync on Dynamics CRM, which is used by the Ellucian CRM range of products, Ellucian Recruit, Advise, and Advance. Before we dive in, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and Forelli. So, Forelli is a professional consulting firm that supports IT functions for all types of higher education institutions. While we have many staff that support our ERP systems, such as Colleague or Banner, there are teams in our company that do system administration, networking, security, you name it. Personally, I serve on a team dedicated to the CRM support. We support all types of CRM solutions, including, but not necessarily limited to, Dynamics CRM, any of the Ellucian CRM products, such as, again, Recruit, Advise, or Advance, Salesforce, and Technolution Slate, just to name a few. We can provide all sorts of CRM service and support, such as implementation, assessments, CRM conversions, custom code process development, etc. Basically, if it's a CRM related need, we can help you out. As I said, my name is Joshua Flick, and I joined Forelli roughly a year and a half ago. I originally started my professional career as a full stack web programmer, where I coded in ASP.NET, C#, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and Microsoft SQL. After about 3.5 years of doing that, I moved into the admissions world, and where I implemented and ran Recruit for a few years, and then I eventually implemented and ran Technolution Slate. And after a few years at that institution, I moved out to Virginia, where I ran Slate at a different school, before eventually becoming a consultant here at Forelli, and where I started to work with a wider variety of CRM products. But my speciality rather is still in the CRM product line and Technolution Slate. Today, I'm putting on my Ellucian hat, and we're going to be taking a look at the email server-side sync, which is most commonly referred to as just server-side sync for the Ellucian CRM product lines. My approach and the screenshots you're going to see today are based on a Recruit CRM, but the process is virtually identical for Advise or Advance. Here in front of you, you can see a couple of the topics we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at, what is email server-side sync? Why do I need to use server-side sync? And, well, how do I use server-side sync? So when it comes to emailing out of the Ellucian CRM product suite, which again is Recruit, Advise, and Advance, there are 4 kind of primary methods. The first we like to refer to as like third-party marketing tools. So the CRM can connect to services like Salesforce Marketing Cloud or Spark Posts, where they can do marketing or HTML-based emails. This approach is great for those types of marketing emails, but for your standard run-of-the-mill notifications and transactional emails, this is overkill and has an awful lot of overhead. So therefore, we've got these other 3 methods. The first is something called the Outlook plugin. So Microsoft provides this plugin for Outlook that allows it to connect to your CRM solution. You can use it to send emails out that would be tracked into the CRM, as well as track any emails that are coming to you back into the CRM system as well. It allows you to sync a lot of data between your work email and the CRM, but it is a rather clunky tool, and it only works on computers running Outlook. So if you're on your phone or a different device or the web or something like that, it wouldn't track anything into the CRM. It used to be great as a supplementary capacity to something like the email router, but it is a bit outdated with the other tools available today. So speaking of the email router, that's the other kind of approach that's available for emailing out of the system. And it's a really small service that runs on the server and provides kind of a one-way communication from your CRM system to your email service. It has been the standard approach for years and uses the SMTP protocol to send emails through your email service. And then finally, the newest approach we've got is called server-side sync. This is the approach that Microsoft developed that allows the CRM to communicate directly with your email server without having a middleman like the email router. It doesn't require installing any extra services and is set up completely through your configuration inside your CRM and your email service itself. Depending upon your email provider, it can also allow you to track email messages back into the CRM, similar to how the Outlook plugin used to function. As our presentation suggests, this is what we'll be talking about today. So right now, you're probably asking, well, why would I want to use server-side sync? Well, it does have a few advantages over some of the other offerings. First off, it communicates directly with the email service your institution uses, so there is no extra service running between the CRM and the email provider, which allows things to run much more efficiently. Secondly, if your institution is using Exchange or Office 365, it allows you to track incoming email back into the system, and this was only previously allowed, by the way, in that Outlook plugin. But the advantage here is that it happens at a server level rather than on the client level with Outlook. So this means it can track incoming email back into the CRM regardless if your computer is running or not. So you can do it while you're away, on your phone, on the web, anytime, automatically. Third, it also provides some monitoring tools uh, and dashboards inside the CRM itself for seeing how syncing is going. It provides way more detail than just what you're used to seeing. So when you set up a user's mailbox inside the system, it's going to provide alerts for any issues that come up so you can easily troubleshoot what might be going on. This is much better than the standard pending send message we used to get when an email wasn't going out and you were using the email router. Now you can test the user's mailbox and see what issue is specifically occurring. But finally, the most important reason to use server-side sync is that the email router is being deprecated. And this is really the only approach for sending CRM-based emails aside from using something like Outlook. This drop in support has happened at the Microsoft level, and so Ellucian is having to follow suit. The new server-side sync is the way forward that is being supported. And you're going to have until May or June of this year in 2020 to get switched over if you are a Recruit client. So let's talk about what this kind of switch would look like. So the switch to server-side sync happens in a few steps. The first we need to do is configure the actual email server profile itself. And to do that, in the main navigation, we're going to navigate to Settings and then Email Configuration. And then once there, we're going to click on the Email Server Profiles button. Once there, we'll click the New in the top gray menu bar, where we're going to have 3 options to choose from, as you see here in the screenshot. If you're using Exchange or Office 365, you'll want to select the Exchange server option, whereas if you're using something like Gmail, you're going to want to select that POP3/SMTP server option. I'm not going to run through all the settings found that you have to configure when you're setting up a new profile, but I will call out a couple of key ones. First, if you're using Office 365, your incoming and outgoing server locations will look like something what I have displayed here on the left screenshot, where it's saying outlook.office365.com. Whereas if you're using something like Gmail, they're going to look like what you see in the right-hand screenshot, where it's like pop.gmail or smtp.gmail.com. Finally, the biggest thing we have to configure here is the credentials section. This specifies how the CRM authenticates against the email service. The options in this dropdown are going to be credentials specified by a user or queue, or credentials specified in an email profile. If you choose credentials specified by a user or queue, each user will have to open their mailbox record inside the CRM and type in their username and password to their email account. This means that whenever they have to change their network password, they also have to remember to come into the CRM and update it as well on their mailbox, because it does not auto-update from the other change. Because of that extra overhead, my recommendation is to actually use the credentials specified in email server profile option, which is what you can see in the screenshot here. This lets you define a single account on the email server profile that communicates back and forth between the email server and the CRM system. This account must have impersonation rights on the Exchange Office 365 server for the user accounts in the CRM that will be emailing. This means that there is an extra configuration that does have to be done on the email server to grant that impersonation. However, that setup is outside the scope of this presentation, but you can reach out to us here at Forelli or out to Ellucian, or look online even at Microsoft's tech documents to find the relevant PowerShell scripts you have to run to grant those permissions. Once you've finished configuring the server profile, the second step is to set up the default sync options and how they will work. This is done by navigating in the main nav again to Settings and Email Configuration. And now we're going to click on the Email Configuration settings, as you can see in that second screenshot. Here, the first thing you'll want to do is set up the process email using to server-side synchronization, that very first option that we can see there. The next 3 dropdowns after you've set up the server profile, which is what we just did in the previous step, are default options that will be applied to new mailboxes created in the CRM. So for reference, a mailbox record in the CRM is automatically created whenever a new user or queue is created inside the CRM. Any existing users won't get any settings you change here in these 3 dropdowns, so you have to go back and update their mailboxes by hand. Basically, I recommend setting all 3 of those bottom dropdowns to none, except for the outgoing email, as you can see here. That one I would go ahead and set to server-side synchronization or email router option. The reason for this is as long as the user's email or mailboxes are approved for email, they can send email out of the system, but they're not going to automatically be tracking anything back in. If you have specific users who you want to offer that functionality to so that their emails can be tracked back in, such as recruiters, you can actually go and change these options directly on that person's mailbox. This way, by default, it's only outgoing that gets sent and nobody tracks incoming, and then you can adjust the incoming mailboxes for users that actually need that functionality. However, if you do want every user in your system by default to be able to track an incoming email back in, you can go ahead and set it up here so that as new mailboxes are created, they have that option. The final configuration I'd like to call out here is how the incoming syncing and tracking will work if you want to take advantage of that. Again, please note that there are other options that can be configured when using this step, but I only have time today to call out the really important ones. There are 2 approaches for syncing and tracking. The first is folder level tracking. By using this approach, nothing is synced by default, but you can create a folder under your inbox folder and your email inbox, and anything put inside that inbox or inside that folder will be tracked automatically into the CRM. One kind of note about this approach is that that tracking folder must exist directly under your inbox. You cannot create a subfolder for tracking under another subfolder. It has to be only one level removed from the inbox. If you do it 2 subfolders level deep and you're dropping emails in there, you're going to be sadly disappointed when none of them track back in. So this is actually a really great approach to allow users which emails they want to have tracked into the system against the appropriate records. All they have to do is simply drag and drop any email they want into that folder, and it automatically works to track against the appropriate records. It is worth noting that this approach does only work with Exchange and Office 365 accounts. It does not work with POP3 or SMTP. The other approach that can be used is called correlation tracking, which is that second checkbox you can see checked here. This uses information in the email header to figure out what to track. Within correlation tracking, there are 2 options. You can use tracking tokens or smart matching. So a tracking token is the kind of thing you see in most IT help desks where you get an email after submitting a ticket, and at the end of the subject line of that email, you're going to see the like a ticket number of some sort. This is used so that if you reply back to it, it can easily track that email, your reply back into the relevant ticket. Same approach here with the CRM. Now, I will note if you do decide to use tracking tokens, you can configure the format of what that number would look like. And it can be an alphanumeric number, so you can do something like ADM and then the number that you want to have auto incrementing. However, I really don't kind of recommend this approach as it just kind of looks tacky for most communication you'd be doing with prospective students. So instead, I really recommend smart matching, which is where it uses things like the subject and email addresses of both the sender and the recipient to determine who it will track the email against. As I said, this is what I recommend and what we found some really good use with. For most schools, I'd recommend actually enabling both the folder level tracking if you're an Office Exchange 365 account and the smart matching, so you can have stuff attempted to auto track in, but you can always put things inside your folder level tracking to force it to try and track. Another real quick note about folder level tracking is that it does not work for a queue. It only works for user accounts. So if you're emailing from a queue, that is usually considered like your generic school email addresses are usually a queue. So it's like admissions@myschool.edu. They're not actual user accounts. If you've got emails going out from that, then you have to use some kind of correlation tracking to make sure the replies to those emails are going to get tracked back in, because the folder level tracking does not work on those. And then the very last option, which is the very bottom checkbox at the very bottom there, is regarding how tracking between 2 user records should work. So the scenario that can happen here is, let's say you're emailing, you've got an email that came into your queue email, so your admissions@myschool.edu from a student, and you decide you want to forward that over to a staff member so that they can respond to it. In order to have that email kind of show up automatically in the system against both records, the Q and the one that went to the staff member, you need to have that checkbox at the bottom there checked. However, this also means that if you have staff members who are prospective students, i.e. they're like maybe going back for a grad program or something like that, any communication they send from their user account in the system to a prospective student also gets tracked against their own prospective student record by having this checkbox checked. So it's kind of a bit of a small security concern if you have that kind of scenario. So it's just something worth considering as to whether you check that box or not. So now that we've gotten through setting up the default syncing and how the tracking is going to work, we now have to go and configure the individual mailboxes for users who will be sending emails and potentially tracking those emails back in. You do this by navigating, again, to settings and email configuration. Hopefully that's becoming a theme. And now you're going to click on the mailboxes option. From here, it's going to open up a listing of mailboxes of your users, and you can just open the ones you need to edit or do a bulk edit to set some of this stuff up. Key things to look at in the mailbox records is the credentials section and then the synchronization methods sections. The credentials section is where the user will need to go to input their username and password if you configure the email server profile with that option credential specified by a user or queue that we talked about earlier. If you are using a single integration account to connect, then you do not have to use anything here. The synchronization methods section is where you can configure how the outbound and incoming email methods should work. This is the exact same thing we saw when we were configuring the defaults. This is just where you can alter it specifically for specific users. So as I suggested earlier, we are using the outgoing email is set to server-side synchronization or email router for everyone by default. But then for any users who need to track incoming emails, you want to have that option available to them. You can come into their mailboxes here and set it to server-side synchronization or email router as well. The only other thing I really want to call out on the mailbox section is once you've finished configuring the mailbox, you can click the test and enable mailbox button at the top to have it actually test the configuration. You'll be able to see how the test goes with the drop-downs that are available right at the very top of the mailbox record. I don't have any screenshots here, but it will show things like outbound test succeeded or failed. However, I really don't find those drop-downs very useful, and instead I jump over to the left-hand side. There's an alerts submenu. And when you click on that, you'll be able to see any specific issues that it would have encountered while trying to test. You can see that in the right-hand screenshot where on my mailbox record, we were having an impersonation error occurring on the email server side that we had to address. One final thing we need to briefly discuss is that users must also configure how they want syncing to work. Each user has to open their personal options, which is done by clicking the gear icon in the top right corner of their navigation, and then navigating to the email tab. Here, they can set up their email or their folder level tracking, which is where they map a specific folder in their Exchange or Office 365 account that they want any emails in there to be synced to the CRM. They do this by clicking the configure folder tracking rules link that you can see right there, as well as specifying what emails should be tracked in the dropdown to the right of track. And you can see that as I've displayed the dropdown option there. This is also the way tracking will work if you're using correlation tracking. So this is kind of a global level of tracking for how this user's emails that they want to track back in, how it will work by default. I would recommend setting this to email messages in response to Dynamics 365 emails, which is what you can see selected here, or email messages from Dynamics 365 leads, contacts, and accounts, which is the option right underneath that. If this is a queue, so like that generic email address that you're setting up these rules for, I'd recommend setting it to all email messages just to make sure it gets everything. You'll also want to make sure that everyone has that create checkbox at the bottom unchecked. I cannot stress how important this is. You do not want person records getting created from tracking an email into the system, because these records are going to have minimal information. At most, at minimum, they're going to have an email address. They may have a name, but aside from that, they're not going to have term or program or anything else that's of relevance for the system. So you just want to make sure that option is unchecked by default. One final note is that these options have to be set on a per person basis by the actual user themselves. There is no way in the system to globally set this for people on their behalf. If you do need to do this for people on their behalf, you're going to have to use a third-party tool like the XRM Toolbox to do it for them, which, to be honest, is probably a pretty good YouTube live presentation on the future that we may do, because there's some really neat options and tools that are available inside that toolbox. The final thing to do in all of this configuration and setup is potentially some configuration on the email service itself. If you're using Exchange or Office 365 and want to configure a single impersonation account to make the connection with the user's email, then you're going to have to grant impersonation and delegation rights, like I mentioned, to that user account for all the mailboxes on the server that we're going to have emails going out. That configuration, again, is outside the scope of this presentation, but as I mentioned earlier, you can reach out to us at Forelli, Ellucian, or look at Microsoft's tech documentation for the relevant PowerShell commands and processes to do it. If you're using something like Gmail for your email, you're going to need to make sure users have enabled the less secure apps access for the CRM to be able to connect to them. Now you might be thinking, okay, I think I can get all this configuration done, especially by reviewing our video, but how do I actually test all of it? I don't want to do it in my production system because until we know it's working, I don't want to, break our emails, but I also can't send emails from my test system. Well, the thing is, you can actually send emails from your test system if you do the above configuration in your test environment. However, you don't want to be sending emails accidentally out from test to students who are real and not your own personal test records. To this end, I recommend setting up workflows that will automatically blank out the email address on the listed record types you see here, unless that email is one of your test emails or your test accounts. Then you'll want to leave that email in place so you can test with that record to make sure it works. So you must make sure to remove all emails from the system except for the ones you want to, and make sure that this workflow that does the removal is triggered on creation or update of any of these records I have listed here. This is so that it will continually blank out the email address in case you're also using your test environment to do some testing of importing of records, or you're manually adding people for event registrations or something like that to test other functionality that you may be building out. You're going to want to make sure all those emails continually get blanked. So server-side sync is a great step forward in how the CRM-based emails interact with the email server, giving us a lot more flexibility for tracking incoming emails and cutting out the middleman of the email router. However, there are a few gotchas to be aware of. You can only sync your email account with one CRM service. So that means if you have, say, Recruit and Advise, staff members can only have their email account set to sync or send from one system, not both. Folder level tracking also does not work with POP3 accounts, nor does it work with queues, as I mentioned. You're going to have to use correlation for those types of emails. Next, sent emails from Exchange, Office 365, SMTP, whatever, do not track into the CRM unless you are sending them specifically from the CRM. So if you're sending an email specifically from your own Outlook or Exchange or Gmail, those do not auto track with all the stuff that we've looked at today. If you need to have those types of emails tracked, if you're using folder level tracking, you can set up a rule to copy that outbound sent email into that folder level tracking folder to allow it to automatically track against the appropriate records. Finally, there are a lot of personal options a user must configure in order to get the syncing working correctly, as we briefly looked at. Having each user make sure to do this task can be a bit of a pain. However, the XRM Toolbox can help to alleviate that with some of the plugins that it has available to it. I hope you all enjoyed today's presentation. Again, I'm Joshua Flick, and if you have any questions about server-side sync, CRMs, or anything higher ed IT related, please reach out to us using any of the contact information displayed out in front of you. We'd be happy to assist you in getting server-side sync running, or just getting your CRM solution running better than it ever has before. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Happy syncing.